Hey everybody, how you doing? Welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Kieran and I like to help people using a spiritual perspective. Today I wanted to talk to you guys about something that is or can cause quite a lot of division within the world, within even the spiritual community, a community in which a lot of people pride themselves on being very unconditional and supportive no matter what, but yet can still cause a lot of arguments and debates, oftentimes unfairly. Right? So before I get into this video, I just wanted to express that this is, of course, my truth, something that I view with some sense of objectivity rather than a personal push of arrogance or opinion. I certainly don't need anybody to hear what I'm saying and decide that I'm trying to force feed information to you. I just hope that this will offer some insight into the topic of God, separate from the religious and human conditioning that has surrounded it, okay? Which is, I guess, the best place to really start, to talk about this truth of God, what that really means, okay? Now, to understand God, to understand what it means to be God, what it means to have that power given to something outside of oneself, right? We have to first look at history. Now, I'm not too sure if you like history. A lot of people don't. They find it quite boring. And to be fair, a lot of it is. But looking at history, at the first instances of God, what we would call God, we can look at early human civilizations, and we can see that back then, humans would have undoubtedly needed something to believe in fundamentally, because back then, as humans evolved quite early on, they would have noticed such a thing as the sun rising, right? Every day, the sun coming up and giving them light so that they could do their tasks. Essentially, this idea that the sun gives life. And so without the knowledge or the understanding of why that was happening, they labeled it the sun god, right? And of course, so on and so on, the rain god, the water god, the death god, all of these gods, these ideas of something outside of oneself that had greater power than the specific individual, right? So on a very human level, the idea of God was always necessary, right? There's a quote by Voltaire, a famous philosopher who wrote Candide, and he was a famous atheist as well at the time during this sort of Enlightenment period of thinking, who I think is responsible for the quote, if there was no God, humans would have to invent him, which gives this idea that as humans develop, there is a need to try and understand what cannot be understood at the present moment. And this is proven over history as God has sort of gone away from polytheism, these ideas of many gods to represent many things, into a more singular entity, right? A singular version of something that everybody can collectively understand as God, as something beyond the human, above, because that is where God is. God is above us. He is not to the side of us. He is not below us. He is not even presented as through religion within us. Not every religion, of course. Some instances that it is actually the primary focus that God is within you. But this idea of God has fundamentally throughout human history been projected as a figure. A figure with the same pigment, skin color as me. Someone who is older, painted, depicted as in murals and pictures as an older white man, right? Not a female, of course, not a female of color, not even a man of color. It is a old white man who has dictated rules upon the world, following instances of religion. Now, there's a quote that goes along with this that I think fits nicely here. I don't know who said it, but it is something along the lines of, religion is falling in love with the salesman rather than the message. In my opinion, in my experience, religion has caused more diversity, suffering, pain, wars, deaths, stigma, greed, envy, hate, and any other sort of negative emotion and feeling, whereas the message was, of course, always something of love, right? Jesus Christ himself, the historical figure, assuming to agree that he existed to some capacity, was an individual who preached unconditional love. He was not a Christian, nor did he preach religion as a means of living your life. That was not his MO, right? That was not his motive. It was to preach love, an unconditional love, something that does come back around now in elements of spirituality when people refer to the beyond as the universe or source, right? These things that are still agreeably beyond our human minds and yet still within some kind of reach of us, right? There is fundamentally always this idea or belief and faith in something greater than the human mind, right? That has always been around since humans were very, very early in the evolutionary history. And it is something that I don't dispute. I don't come to you from the perspective of there is nothing beyond this life. Otherwise, I wouldn't really know what I was doing with this YouTube channel. The whole point is to present something with a spiritual perspective. And a spiritual perspective is, to me, looking at something from a greater eye, from a greater perspective, one that has a lens that is far-reaching, that doesn't just focus on a singular event or singular person, singular idea, or singular opinion. It is all-encompassing. And that is the opinion that I am trying to express to you, the truth of this idea of God, right? Now, throughout history, humans have definitively identified God as, I have already suggested, as this solitary figure that is outside of itself and also dictates rules, right? And of course is the result of many different religions that all fundamentally in some way say the same thing and yet have caused an incredible amount of pain on each side, with even very similar origin stories. Not that it's a popular belief among these die-hard religious people, but Christianity and Islam, very similar backgrounds, very similar origin stories, very similar messages, right? And yet each declares itself the truth. And so what I take a look and how I view these religions, how I view God, is not as proof of the individual being or religion being correct, but as proof that there is a similar energy shared behind everything, right? Now, in my experience in life as a human, in this incarnation as me, Kieran Hunter, I've experienced that. I've experienced agnosticism. I've experienced that. I've experienced atheism. It seemed a logical conclusion at the time. And I've experienced at 23, 24, a spiritual awakening, the next level of phase, I suppose, in spiritual evolution of humanity. The awareness that you are a soul having a human experience. Something that is hard to teach someone else, not only because of lack of concrete evidence, but also because in that specific journey, one often is forced to understand themselves, and that causes quite a lot of chaos and a lot of ego death and a lot of humbling, which has happened to me in many ways. Not to say that I'm perfect. In fact, I don't claim to know anything with full credibility. After all, our human brains can only handle so much, and the only thing I truly do know is that tapioca is a poor choice of dessert. Other than that, I speak from, hopefully, a place of truth. But at the end of the day, what can I really say that many people haven't already understood to some degree? But I hope to be a conduit of truth and information. And that being said, to further the extent of this soul within me, the real me, beyond the mind, through this spiritual awakening, one understands that everything is connected. One experiences God as a label. One experiences the universe as a label. One experiences Source as a label. In Star Wars, this is called the Force, right? This is called the Force. Whether or not you call it Source, the Force, the universe, God, Allah, Buddha, it all shares a very similar energy that can be proven through the experience of the individual. One often claims that religious people do not ever experience any sort of proof of God. But I don't believe that to be the case. I think many of them do experience a proof of God. But God is a label. It is a word that has given a specific inherent meaning, often popularized through the English language. This idea of God is all-encompassing. It's huge. It's above us. It's beyond us. And we've given it so much meaning that we place the power outside of ourselves, oftentimes without realizing that that energy is the same energy that flows within us. A principle of spirituality, New Age spirituality maybe, but my version of spirituality, regardless, it's still my version. And we experience this as a belief that energy, that we're made up of the universe, and the universe is made up of us, and that life is a reflection of us. Because once we die, life does not stop. But life has no opinion about us. But we do give a meaning to life. We have an opinion of life. Whether or not you think life is shitty or you think it's great, your reality or life is the same. And you can change your perception at any time. Proof that life is not fundamentally one way. Many times in life, I've thought life was shitty, and my life was shitty because of that. And now I've been on an experience that allows me to see beauty much more often. And so now life is beautiful to me. Now, beauty to me doesn't mean that bad things don't happen, but it does mean it's profound. So life is more fully experienced through me now than it ever has been before. And so life is this changing thing. And yet, as life changes and we change ourselves, we still cling to these old belief systems, these old ways of being that are far outdated, clinging to a God, to a label of something that we must define ourselves with. People do this within a spiritual community as well. I've seen it many times how in spiritual community we take this idea of the universe or spirit guides or angels and different sorts of things that these people do, yoga, veganism. They fight among each other, right? The spiritual community, they say, no, this is how it is. This is what it's supposed to be. People think, okay, humans, past life reincarnations. And other people say, that's not the case at all. You have this large element of things like soulmates and twin flames, whereas you would ask somebody like Eckhart Tolle, who would probably denounce such a thing. I've read very interesting and well-written spiritual books, which you would call them, and who the author openly ridiculed using the universe as a term, as a spiritual method of understanding, right? So there's the divisiveness and the sort of arguments and debates and the sides, they never seem to change much, right? People still have their opinions and their views on things. And so applying that to the same idea, God becomes no different than the universe. It is a similar energy to everything that exists. I have seen my spiritual experience play out again and again and again with irrefutable evidence and proof for my life to suggest that not only are my abilities correct, but that my truth in what I believe in is correct, because I've experienced it over and over and over again with conviction. Whether or not that's the placebo effect or proof that there is something beyond me can certainly be debated by many people who would call spirituality nothing more than pseudoscience. But regardless of all of that, the idea of a God is something that humans have invented. It is a man-made idea that there must be one person in charge of everything, that there must be somebody making rules, so that way we can understand life and we can accept death. Two things that are fundamentally the most confusing to humans to understand. The first, life, to try and make a place in this world, and two, death, to try and come to terms with your own mortality. And that everything that you do ultimately will lead to the same end, which causes in both ways a great amount of suffering. What should I do with my life? I'm so confused. I'm suffering because of it, and nothing I do will matter. I'm going to die in the end, and suffering is caused because of it. So we look to things like God to give us an answer. And many people have found answers to their degree of truth, but it's only something their mind can accept at the time. God is a level. It's here, along with religion. The awakening, spiritual awakening, going past that, it's up. It goes beyond that. And you can look down and you can see why God makes sense. You can even see how it's connected. You have a God here. You have Buddha here. You have Allah here. You have Source here. You have all of these levels of truth existing on the same plane of existence, existing within this 3D reality, and yet you can access different levels if you're able to, if that's what you're here to do, if that's what you can do, if that's your experience. You can access these. But if you're on a lower level, it's hard to see the next level beyond that. It's hard for a religious person to break free of their conditioning because to them, their experience has been proven to work for them, even though it could be better. It could be more freeing. It could allow the individual to express their natural desire as a human having a spiritual experience, or as a soul having a human experience. I mixed that up. I don't know how to edit videos, so moving on. You can have this sort of experience that allows the individual to move past fear and judgment and conditioning. And anything that does that is not coming from a place of love. A great example is in religion, many religions. But the first example, of course, let's just say is different parts of Christianity. It is ill-advised and immoral and even wrong to have sex before marriage, right? Something that when you take a larger look at seems rather ludicrous, that an all-powerful God would create humans and then judge them for what they do. To judge them for what they do despite how difficult it is to be human, despite how difficult it is to remove egoic thinking and conditioning and shame and pain from within this experience, right? And it becomes silly to attach yourself to such degrees of things which limit expression, because one person may truthfully, honestly feel that what they need to do is have the least amount of sexual partners as possible until they do find someone they can absolutely be compatible with. And there's nothing wrong with that. But another person may feel restricted and they just want to experience something. They want to experience a physical desire within themselves, and then they can't because there's a rule that says that they're not allowed to. And if they do, not only will they be seen as wrong within their religion or by God, but also among the people they care about, who are the same people telling them that God is real. The same people that telling them this is how God is. That shouldn't be something that is told to you. It should be an experience that you feel within your heart and soul. It should be an energy that you can connect to on your own without there needing to be a prerequisite. You should be able to access this universal intelligence, this love, without a trial and tribulation of pain and suffering and conditioning. You should be able to connect that and feel that you deserve it without needing to follow an obligated rule and set of restrictions. To me, that is no real reality at all. That is very human. Humans are the ones that put things within boxes, not this God, not the universe. The universe has no boundaries. It's limitless. In fact, even in physics, not that I understand much, but even in physics, the universe, our galaxies, right, constantly expanding. The purpose that I see in life is that life is here to understand itself. If we are to give the God the term here, if we're going to give God a basis, we must understand and then that God is here to understand humanity. It's here to understand itself. It's here to understand life. And humanity is a part of life. So, life is here to experience itself. The universe is constantly expanding, constantly growing, dying, being reborn in this infinite sort of loop of blipping in and out of existence. One thing dies, one thing lives, but does anything really die? Different dimensions, these very esoteric spiritual topics that can often leave one very confused, that I won't even begin to really get into in this video. All of these things go on and on and on to prove or to suggest that everything is inherently connected. So if you choose to call something God, it is important that you do not identify this God as a singular entity with rules and obligations, someone who is in charge of a specific religion or a sect of religion. Because as you may have noticed, even within religion, there is different sects of that. Within Christianity, there are so many. In fact, some of them people would even call cults. And even within the same religion, people look at that cult as weird, dogmatic, scary. And yet, feel free to have no judgment for their own sect of religion. And it is these attitudes that hold us back as humans, that they hold us back because they do not allow us to express ourselves fully. The importance and purpose of being spiritual, of being awakened, of even having this idea of moving beyond the limitations of what society has said, is to experience yourself, to know yourself fully, to love yourself, so that you can do what you feel necessary, so that you can be who you're meant to be, so you can be with the person you're meant to be with, so you can have the right relationship, so you can have the right life, so you can follow the right career path, so you can make money how you want to, so you can move here, live here, do this, have this, do sex, don't have sex, dye your hair a certain color without being called a faggot. The point is, you should be able to express yourself. Whether you're a man, a woman, whatever your color, orientation, background, plans for the future, you should be able to live fully without feeling judged in your existence. And the idea of God in a traditional human way is outdated and unnecessary. But God, regardless, is a label. You can think of God as the universe and apply that same message of interconnectedness, and it all makes sense. It makes so much sense that you no longer feel this need to restrain yourself. Even within a spiritual community, there's lots of limitations to what being spiritual means. I'm not a vegan. I like and enjoy meat. Doesn't mean that I necessarily think killing animals is a great thing. It's certainly not a kind act, but I'm not going to stop eating meat. Could make me a hypocrite, but it doesn't make me any less spiritual. It doesn't shake my faith in myself or what I've experienced to be true. And so I shouldn't have to live a certain lifestyle that at the time, right now in my life, doesn't resonate with me, right? And I have no judgment for people that are vegans, right? And that's just a small example of something within a spiritual community in which many people feel they have to fit into a box, right? And yet there are things that I do enjoy that are considered spiritual, such as meditation and yoga. But it doesn't mean that I identify myself with them. I don't always talk about yoga, and I don't always talk about meditating, nor do I try to preach those things onto everybody who doesn't give a shit about them fundamentally. Because it would only work on people who do care about them, right? So it's this idea of God that is holding you yourself back if you are still attached to it. It's important to not be attached to the things that you believe in too much because one, they change over the course of your life, and two, your awareness expands as you grow. And so you realize more things. And so the things that you do believe in, you can even believe in more, but to a different extent. And those two kind of work together very well. And so as you do try to manifest the things into your life, as you do try to connect to something beyond yourself, remember that when you try to connect, do not give it a name. Call it what you feel called to call it, but don't make it something that is so fundamentally important that it then limits you. Because anything can limit you. If you identify as a man or a woman, then everything you do stems from being a man or a woman. Now you're fitting into society's expectations of what it means to be a man and a woman. If you identify with your career and money, now your focus is always on what you have rather than how you feel. If you identify as your orientation, sexual orientation, then everything you do goes with that. Now you have to fit into a certain mold. If you only identify with being heterosexual, you'll almost go out of your way to prove that you're heterosexual, even though nobody really cares whether or not you are or not. Meaning, you might not wear a pink shirt despite the fact that you like that specific shirt because it looks effeminate, right? Effeminate. So you can't identify with one singular thing. You are all-encompassing. You're beyond that. You are essentially everything and nothing. You're not your thoughts. You're not your body. You're not even your feelings. You are an awareness. You are an observer. This is your experience. Life is your experience. We often try to find a meaning in life. The first mistake being that we only say there's one. What's the meaning of life? Well, you're fucked now, because now you only have one meaning. You can't give multiple meanings to this life. And everybody has a different meaning to life, so how can there be one ultimate encompassing meaning? You are more than you know, and more than you have understood. And you will continue to grow and understand that as you go on. And one day, hopefully, you will reach the end of your life with an awareness that you lived your life the best that you did. And you will discover that nothing truly does die. Only the human. Only the body. And God, or the universe, or source, or the force, or Buddha, or Allah, it's all a similar energy which can be proven through your experience, but does not need to dictate your life. It does not need to control you or others in any single way. It should be free. It should be loving. It should be non-judgmental. We do give these things meaning. We do like labels. We do like to organize. That's what the mind is very good at. But the mind only knows what the mind knows, based upon the information it's learned. I only know the capital of France is Paris because I read it in a book, or because somebody told me. But I may not understand things about myself until I learn them. My mind can't tell me that. My mind cannot give me the experience that my soul knows, that has had through many lifetimes of not only this life, but life itself, until I become, or I get into that awareness. So, ultimately, God, the universe, it's a shared idea, a shared collective meaning, a shared energy, where regardless of how you choose to identify with that energy, the energy itself exists nonetheless. You don't need to focus on one aspect, one label, in order to be right, in order to be more right than others, in order to speak a truth that others can't possibly understand. That's not at all what it should be like, and definitely, I hope, not the message that I'm spreading here. I simply mean to say that there is an objective way to look at things and still have a belief in something beyond yourself, without becoming too attached to it that it limits your movements and actions, and even your thoughts to an extent. And so I don't feel very pressured to be a certain kind of way, even within my own spirituality, because my spirituality is my expression with the energy that I'm talking about, which I personally would choose to call the universe, and even source to an extent. Other people even go beyond this and call it God's source. And many people within spirituality even refer to it as God without this man-made idea of it. So, I hope that this video allows many of you that may be struggling with this concept of yourself, with what you're supposed to be believing in, and allows you to express who you really are without this fear that you're doing something wrong. Again, the only thing that I know that you could be doing wrong on this planet is thinking that tapioca is a good choice of dessert. Okay? Alright guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope this video was helpful. And of course, if anybody wants to debate anything that I'm talking about, or just leave a comment and talk, I'm more than happy to do that. Again, I hope that this didn't come off as too preachy. Just tried to share some information that I hope was ultimately helpful in the end. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching, and hopefully I will speak to you guys soon. Bye-bye.